The 90s blockbuster machine buried dozens of genuinely unsettling thrillers under franchise sequels and event movies, and most of them never recovered. These 9 films understood something the studios were too busy to notice, that the most terrifying thing on screen is never the stranger breaking through a window, but the person you already let through the door. Bad Influence arrived in 1990, asking the most uncomfortable question a certain kind of person eventually has to answer, whether the wildest chapter of their life was liberation or just someone more dangerous than them running the whole thing. James Spader plays Michael, a timid corporate executive who meets a charismatic drifter named Alex, gets pulled into underground clubs and casual law-breaking, and discovers too late that Alex has been filming everything as leverage. Rob Lowe plays Alex, and the film landed while Lowe was still managing the fallout from a real sex tape scandal 2 years earlier. Except the parallel was far more unsettling than it first appeared, because he was not playing the victim of a camera this time, but the predator behind one, a career move so deliberately meta it should not have worked, and absolutely did. Lowe plays Alex as someone who never raises his voice, never loses control, and makes Michael's descent feel less like corruption and more like inevitability, which is the most frightening version of this story the film could have told.
Hear about what happened to Patterson?
What about him?
He got mugged last night.
What?
Assaulted, can you believe it?
Oh, gross. What happened to your hand?
The script was written by David Koepp, established the toxic friendship template that dominated the decade, and predicted a world where private footage becomes the most dangerous weapon a person can carry, an idea that felt cinematic in 1990 and documentary by 2010. Blink follows Emma Brody, a woman who gets her sight back after 20 years of blindness, and immediately witnesses a murder, except her brain takes hours to process what her eyes have already seen, meaning she cannot identify the killer until long after he has moved on. There is something uniquely terrifying about a protagonist whose greatest vulnerability is her own perception, because the one thing every thriller assumes you can trust is what you saw with your own eyes, and Emma cannot trust that at all.
Did you happen to consume any alcoholic beverages last night?
You don't believe me?
Did you have anything to drink? It's a simple question.
Madeleine Stowe spent weeks wearing blackout glasses 8 hours a day to understand the transition, insisted on performing her own stunts in sequences she genuinely could not see, and accumulated real injuries. Navigating sets the production had not made safer just because she asked to do them herself. During filming at a Chicago apartment, a figure appeared in the background of a hallway scene that nobody on set could account for. The frame circulated through early internet forums, and audiences began renting the tape specifically to freeze frame the shadow, giving the film a second life that $16 million at the box office never could have built. Dream Lover follows Ray Reardon, a successful architect who meets a woman named Lena at a gallery and marries her fast enough that he never stops to ask the questions that would have saved him. Lena seems like everything he ever wanted, which is exactly the point, and Machen Amick plays her as someone so magnetic that Ray's inability to walk away stops feeling like stupidity and starts feeling completely understandable. The deeper he digs, a college she never attended, parents she claimed were abusive when they turn out to be perfectly ordinary people in Texas who have no idea why their daughter's husband just showed up at their door, an identity constructed entirely from scratch to trap a wealthy husband, the more he realizes she has already positioned the legal and mental health systems to work against him, turning his own desperation into the evidence used to discredit him.
I always knew you were abusive. I do you, you do me.
Who is it?
Don't you know?
James Spader took the role coming off Sex Lies and Videotape, deliberately seeking projects that pushed psychological humiliation further, and the performance locked him so completely into that territory that it changed the kinds of roles he was offered for years. Dream Lover grossed $256,000 against a $15 million budget, a result so catastrophic it ended the director's career behind the camera, which is a strange fate for a film that understands the specific damage of loving someone who was never real. Pacific Heights is the film that turned home ownership into a horror premise and made an entire generation of landlords paranoid for life. A young San Francisco couple stretches every dollar they have to buy a Victorian fixer-upper, and there is something in that opening act. Anyone who has ever overextended themselves for a dream will recognize that specific mix of pride and quiet terror that comes with knowing one bad month could unravel everything. They rent the ground floor to cover the mortgage, watch their tenant breed cockroaches in the walls, hammer at 3 in the morning, and goad the husband into a physical confrontation, so he can use the resulting restraining order to legally bar the homeowner from his own building.
I spoke to the woman at the bank, and she told me that Carter Hayes' income is over $200,000 a year. I've checked him out.
Michael Keaton had just finished playing Batman and deliberately chose Carter Hayes to prove he could terrify an audience without a mask, and the improvised detail of sitting alone in the dark catching cockroaches with his bare hands became the moment audiences couldn't shake. The script came directly from the screenwriter's own experience with the professional tenant who had done exactly this to him in real life, and Bay Area landlords cited it as a documentary for decades. It knocked Goodfellas off the #1 spot in its opening weekend, which tells you everything about how many people had a bad tenant story they needed to see play out on screen. Primal Fear is the film where Richard Gere plays the most confident man in any room he walks into. A flamboyant Chicago defense attorney who takes on the case of Aaron Stampler, a stuttering altar boy caught fleeing the scene of an archbishop's murder, and spends the entire film being absolutely certain he has everyone figured out.
I want to know when we're getting all the discovery. I've got motions to file.
No, you don't. You're looking to make a deal.
Aaron is the kind of character who makes you want to protect him. The moment he appears, soft-spoken and visibly terrified, the last person you could imagine capable of violence. And the film knows exactly what it is doing with that instinct. Over 2,100 actors auditioned for Aaron. Leonardo DiCaprio passed because he felt the character was not fully formed. And Edward Norton walked in with no film credits, no agent, and invented Aaron's stutter on the spot because it was not in the script. After which, the room went silent and the studio stopped auditioning that same day. Vale wins the case with a directed verdict of not guilty by reason of insanity. Aaron is ordered to a psychiatric hospital rather than death row. And what happens in the final 2 minutes of the film is the reason nobody who has seen it ever forgets it. Single white female took the creeping dread of watching someone absorb another person's identity and ran it all the way to its most terrifying conclusion. Allison kicks out her fiancé after he sleeps with his ex-wife, takes on a roommate named Hadra to cover rent, and watches a quiet, grateful stranger start buying her clothes, cutting her hair to match, and targeting the ex-wife specifically to protect Allison before removing anyone else who threatens her place in Allison's world.
If the eggs were okay, maybe you guys would trust me with dinner. Do you guys know when you'll be back?
No, it's kind of an anniversary tonight, so I think we're gonna eat out.
Jennifer Jason Leigh kept the atmosphere on set so uncomfortable, treating Bridget Fonda with a mixture of worship and quiet hostility between takes, that the crew described it as watching someone fall in love with a mirror. The film's most consequential scene turned a stiletto heel into a murder weapon, a choice that required careful staging to avoid a rating that would have killed its commercial prospects, and it became the defining sequence of the erotic thriller genre for the decade that followed. The title embedded itself permanently into the English language as shorthand for dangerous obsession, and the $84 million worldwide gross on a $16 million budget confirmed the studio had a hit on its hands and absolutely no idea why. The Devil's Advocate is a 2.5-hour legal thriller about Satan running a Manhattan law firm, and somehow a major studio made it with an A-list cast and a $57 million budget, which is the kind of ambition that barely exists anymore. Kevin Lomax is an undefeated Florida defense attorney, recruited by a powerful firm run by a man named John Milton, whose name is not a coincidence, and the film reveals its hand early when Kevin wins a triple murder case by destroying a witness's credibility, despite knowing his client killed children, a moment that should end his career and instead accelerates his ascent into Milton's world.
You made up a story. A special story. A story about a math teacher who was tough on you, who kept you after class. A huge hog beast you didn't like.
Kevin is the kind of man who has confused winning with being right for so long that he genuinely cannot tell the difference anymore, and watching that blindness get used against him is where the film does its real damage. Keanu Reeves cut his own salary by several $million to bridge the gap between the budget and Al Pacino's asking price. Pacino had rejected the role 3 times before the rewrites changed his mind, and the result is a performance so committed to theatrical excess that it consumes every scene it enters. After release, a sculptor sued Warner Brothers, claiming the massive artwork in the film's climax was a direct copyright infringement of his piece at Washington National Cathedral, forcing the studio to digitally alter every future release, and turning the original unedited version into a collector's item nobody had planned for. Unlawful Entry is built on the premise that the most dangerous person in your life is the one with a badge, a key to your house, and the patience to wait. A Los Angeles couple calls the police after a home invasion, befriends the responding officer, and spends the rest of the film realizing that the man who installed their security system now considers himself a permanent fixture in it. Ray Liotta plays Pete Davis with such controlled menace that you understand exactly how a couple would trust him right up until that trust becomes a suffocating campaign to replace the husband entirely. And what makes him genuinely frightening is that he never stops believing he is the good guy.
Assaulting a police officer? Nice civilized man like you, Michael? What are you gonna do? Arrest me?
Liotta maintained that intensity by staring at Madeline Stowe from across the set without blinking even when cameras were not rolling, an approach that unnerved Kurt Russell throughout the entire shoot and caused the crew to describe the atmosphere as genuinely dangerous. The film arrived the same summer as the Los Angeles riots. Law enforcement groups protested the release, claiming it would damage public trust in police, and the controversy drove ticket sales rather than suppressing them. The original Insomnia was produced in Norway for roughly $2 million. Follows a disgraced detective sent north during the midnight sun season where daylight never ends, and after he accidentally shoots his own partner in a fog chase and covers it up, the killer he is hunting becomes the only witness and uses that knowledge to forge a blackmail relationship that slowly dismantles him from the inside. What separates the detective from the standard corrupt cop is that he made one desperate mistake in a moment of panic, and everything that follows is the cost of that single decision, which is a more uncomfortable kind of guilt to watch than outright villainy because it is far easier to imagine being him. Stellan Skarsgård stayed awake for 36-hour stretches before filming his most intense scenes, not to simulate exhaustion but to actually be in physical collapse, and the dead-eyed disorientation the camera captured belongs to a man genuinely on the edge rather than one performing it. Christopher Nolan remade it with Al Pacino in 2002, and the remake introduced the story to a global audience. But the original holds because its detective survived spiritually destroyed by his own silence, an ending the American version decided was too bleak.